and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by CaliberMind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Nate Smitha. Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. The VP of Consulting Services at Etumos. I have a background in marketing operations that spans nearly 10 years, and six of those years have been in consulting. I got in on the ground floor at Etumos, working with Edward Unthank, founder of Etumos. And there I developed our initial marketing operations framework. I've been in that role for 6 years now, and since then we've grown the services team to span kind of all of the main pillars of marketing operations, from platform architecture, campaign production, engineering, and analytics. So my role now is overseeing those teams.
And this isn't a commercial for Etumos, but I have to say that Nate is one of the strongest consultants I've ever worked with. And it was at a time when I had been an administrator for Salesforce. I had done it for Eloqua, and then, surprise, had to learn how to be one for Marketo. And Nate came in and just really set a really good example around best practices, templatization, like all the things you should be doing. So can recommend.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it was a great experience working with you on that.
Thank you. So let's talk about a trope we hear from hiring managers all the time. There are a lot of job descriptions out there that have the word unicorn, or a job description that is so all-encompassing we wonder how one person could possibly do all those things at once. What have you seen work well at organizations, instead of digging into why we shouldn't hire the unicorn? Let's talk about what does work well.
Well, I don't think that, to your point, the decision is not to hire the unicorn. We all strive to be the unicorn, and the unicorn is someone who, if I'm going to define that, is really good at a lot of things, has a great breadth, and is able to go deep in those. Usually those folks are defined as people who they never stop learning. I like to think of myself as one of those folks who there's just a constant passion around learning. And what I see work really well is, when companies are able to build a team out around a unicorn and give that person some management opportunity and quickly grow the team, there can be success in that. So I don't think that, that's always a poor course of action, but I think that the better piece is to break out the role that you're hiring for into kind of the subcategories, the functions of what makes up the 40-hour work week. And
yes,
at Etumos, we've done that by defining the 4 pillars of marketing operations being, platform operations, campaigns, MyOps being marketing analytics, and engineering. So we like to think about it in those terms. And then from there, there's even more specialization.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important distinction, because on the RMR and in my personal life, I encourage people to diversify their talents. It's like investing, right? Like, the more things you can do really well, the more marketable you are. However, accepting a position with a job description that's a mile long, you have to do a lot of research before you say yes, because it's really easy to walk into a role and try to do 3 jobs at once and then burn out. So I think this is more about avoiding burnout than it is saying, don't be the unicorn.
Yeah. So I've built out a few service teams here at Etumos, and the challenge in doing that is not creating a job description that is, like falling into that trap of creating a unicorn job description, which can be really hard when you're starting to grow a team. You've got all of these core functions that need to be filled. And the thing that I try to keep in mind is, if you hire the person that is good at all of the things right out of the gate, not only are they hard to find and extremely expensive, but the unicorn is hard to keep around.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I meant earlier by, it can work if you can put the right resources and the team underneath that person to leverage all that experience. But otherwise, you end up, frankly, paying for someone who is a very expensive resource on the team who you can't challenge enough in those early stages. So what I've seen work best for companies is figuring out what those core responsibilities are and what the primary business function is. Like, today, know what the secondary functions are down the road, what you need to grow the person into. And then as you're interviewing those candidates, look for those traits so that you can feel confident that their growth path, grow that unicorn, not hire the unicorn, that you can get them to grow with the business's needs. And that's where I've seen the most success.
Yeah, and as that purple squirrel, as the recruiters call it, whenever I had to learn during the interview process to really push them on what is your headcount plan for the next 2, 3, 5 years? How are you planning on scaling operations compared to the rest of the business? How do you see breaking out these roles in the future? Because I understand the budgetary constraints that come with a startup, but it's really critical that as the company grows really quickly, that they're also planning on scaling their operations organization to match that growth.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that, you mentioned the budget shortcomings. One of the, if we're said, let's talk about what works well. And I think that's really hiring for those core functions. But one of the greatest downfalls to hiring the unicorn is that you end up hiring someone in and they're wanting to grow and you just can't get them. Their goal is to continue learning, develop new process, build out new pieces. And then they're stuck mostly in the day-to-day. When you look at the routine execution, that's what they end up doing. And you end up with someone who's really unhappy in their role, can't retain them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because there are different personality types and we need all of them. So the folks who are really interested in problem solving and developing new things and fixing things, once they get to the point where things are fixed and they have to do the day-to-day maintenance, totally 100% agree. If somebody is coming in and completely reorganizing, let's say, an instance of Marketo, they get to the end of that, and then it's just creating email campaign after email campaign, that's going to be really frustrating for that person.
Yeah, that's when they're on their way out and onto the next opportunity if you can't continue to evolve the role and build the team.
So. Yeah, and there's so many different business problems that this person could go after. So either they need to be put in a role where they're doing problem solving more often, or they should think about moving into consulting. Anyway.
Yeah, one of the things that we do for scale here at Etumos, consultants need to have that breadth of knowledge, and then they also need to go deep. So that's like keeping folks engaged over the long term. I think there's a lot of benefit to hiring for those core functions. And as I said, mapping out what the secondary needs will be for the role and how the role needs to evolve from the start. And that is like taking what you consider maybe a specialization and just building deeper functions and role specialization. So, one of the things I would say is the myth of like the campaign operations generalist. Well, it's fine to have someone in the early stages who is a generalist, but if we're thinking about how do we scale campaign production, how do we get more efficient, do more, it can't all sit with that one person. And eventually, when you look at really mature organizations, there's QA specialists, there's build specialists, there's architects, there's campaign project managers and program managers leading sprint processes. So we've really set up these specializations that we're working to get our folks to grow into that are going to set them up for success in the future and allow them to take the knowledge that they have where they're the best at campaign production and build that out and get deeper in that function without having to completely shift gears and go into, platform operations or pure project management.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that role and really getting good at it because it's so valuable to the business. Email still works. It's really important to have somebody in that role who's detail oriented and really, maybe interested in psychology and understanding what drives people to open and engage with things. So absolutely, I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But I do want to talk about, I want to go back to the expense of hiring the unicorn and the expense of that role and having a salary point that person is happy with. Beyond that, if they're spending 50% of their time cleaning data or doing some of the other tasks, you're kind of wasting that resource a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you have somebody who can deeply specialize in something or is very interested in something, it's really important to look at where you should be automating, what you can do in your marketing automation platform, what should be done elsewhere to really optimize and free up that person to make the most of them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is a great segue into we talked a little bit about forcing one application to do everything and why that isn't a great idea. I would love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, maybe just when we think about people as part of that segue transition, we talked a little bit in the past, you and I, about developers and the role of a developer is someone who can often comes in and looks at these manual processes that someone is doing the execution work on a day-to-day basis, and they're able to fill in the gaps. There's such a robust tool set, of workflow automation tools out on the market now that a developer can come in and see problems in a different light. And if you have a marketing operations person who can kind of is good at project management, is good at understanding like the business objectives, they can work really well with that developer to come up with some custom solutions. And when we take that to technology, I think that very few mature organizations are able to be supported solely by a marketing automation platform today. They were intended and still strive to do it all. Some, have more robust product ecosystems around them, and they're bringing in different pieces of those product ecosystems, which is great to see. Others are still just very much trying to do it all. And I think that we see reporting as a common area where there's just shortcomings there that need to be extended beyond the marketing automation platform. Data transformation, like the whole ETL process, data calculation and management is very limited in these platforms. And so we're looking for, and probably to the natural progression of where this conversation would go, is CDPs are something that we've seen as really helping on that front from the reporting perspective. There's lots of great reporting solutions that work best when working within a data warehouse or in conjunction with a CDP. That's where I see, those marketing automation platforms they can't do it all for a mature organization today.
Well, and you're right, they can't, because I look at Salesforce too. So we hear companies talking about how there needs to be a single source of truth. So they try to put all the data from every application into their CRM or their marketing automation platform. They start leveraging all these custom objects, which gets expensive. And then the storage fills up, which gets very expensive. When you look at, let's say you want to try to turn Salesforce into your single source of truth and do all of your reporting in there, if you have a weblogger and you're tracking website activity, your database blows up, in a month, right? Customer data platforms make sense from so many standpoints. So in all the data processing that has to take place in order for all of your marketing systems to be normalized and have unification that identifies an account, a contact, and all that. So like marketing automation, at least from what I've seen, is pretty person-centric. You're dealing with individual interactions. When it comes to B2B businesses in particular, we think of it as an account, buying committee, all of these different things. And it's so important that we use a customer data platform that can scale to manage both the data storage and the transformation processes, like you said, and connecting all of those things together. Totally agree with you and wanted to...
Yeah, no, I think that we're definitely on the same page in that. I think that there's a lot of, I also think coming from the marketing operations side, what is the marketing automation platform good at today? It's really good at, trigger-based workflows off of inbound activities. Salesforce also has, activities that it's tracking, like inputs and signals that can be from sales conversations that are occurring. And these two different systems, they've tried to sync those together in the past, and neither one of them is perfect when it comes to the whole transformation of data and getting one consolidated view. And I think that's the really cool direction that we're headed in with CDPs is having a consolidated customer profile that's at both a good roll up on the person and also on the organization, the company that you're selling into.
Yeah, especially as we move away from so much gated content and have to start identifying people based on IP address and all of these other information factors and unify that information. It's just extremely unadvisable to do that in either your CRM or your marketing automation platform.
a great example that we've been working on internally is centralized preference management and privacy compliance management, where you're getting signals that both within the CRM and within the marketing automation platform for folks that want to opt out of communications, and where can you do that, store that information and standardize it and then make it accessible to the rest of the organization, but in a data warehouse or CDP solution, custom built or out of the box. You need something that serves the purpose.
Well, I'm even thinking of life cycle management, right? Because there are a lot of things that depend on opportunity data. And then you have to look at it from the perspective of we're not just measuring the net new prospects life cycle. We also have to take into consideration expansion and renewal. And how do we build in, is it a separate funnel? Do you put recycling in place so that we can track people being little squirrels and bouncing in and out of those funnels? There's just so much to it that it's hard for any one platform to keep up because it has to be looking everywhere at once.
I would just say that one of the areas within lifecycle and in lead management that I think has the greatest opportunity in a CDP is qualification. We're constantly seeking to abstract our targeting and pull all of these demographic and behavior signals together into different calculated scores that we've used for a long time as thresholds, whether that's predictive or the more traditional kind of thresholds that you've created. The CDP gives you an awesome opportunity to calculate multiple models and see what's going to work better or predict volumes that you would pass, and then, look at conversion rate without kind of giving you the flexibility to move from model to model and better refine those over time than you would have in any out-of-the-box marketing automation platform.
Absolutely, especially when you start considering, does it make sense to have different models for expansion versus net new, and you're incorporating
what you were talking about. Yeah, that's what
and you're incorporating product signals into your expansion and renewal business as opposed to net new where you may not have that. There's just so many different variables you can take into place. And at Caliber Mind, we've incorporated intent data and other signals and have been able to narrow down that intent data to the data points that actually matter, as opposed to the 2 million plus records you're going to get from one of those systems. And that can make a huge difference on sales cycle. Like, you can shorten your sales cycle by 4 to 6 weeks. We've seen it by being able to take all of those different factors into account. So 100%. We talked a little bit about building best practices in your marketing automation platform, standardizing, templatizing. When does it make sense to go out of the box and develop a process? And when does it make sense to stick with standard functionality? I know this is a super broad question, but we can dig into it.
So when to customize, I guess that's when are you going to embrace complexity, custom tools? It's when I think you have the resources to maintain them. You're trying to figure out what works. You're looking to, you got to have a baseline before you can standardize and create a kind of standardized campaign and customer prospect experience with those campaigns. It is customization, and it's figuring out what works. So I would say that you can customize up until the point that you need to scale, like where you need to hit, if it's speed to market, if it's growing a team and it's scaling, I think you have to have an element of standardization in there. You have a little bit more freedom to customize when you're working with smaller teams and more one-off pieces. And sometimes that's a good way to test, is to just, go off and create some customizations and test, and then you can compare those results with your standard processes and see if you're able to drive improved conversion rates. That's kind of our standard practice for tweaking those standard campaign experiences.
And I've seen on the analytics side, I've seen companies go completely away from the campaign member in Salesforce with their marketing automation integration. And what I will say is they have been able to mirror what's there and reproduce it. But when you look at adding on tools, you've kind of dug yourself into a hole because a lot of those tools have to standardize somewhat, and they're going to rely on you using the campaign and campaign member. I always say anything's possible. But it's whether or not you really should. And straying from standard objects can get you in a lot of trouble down the road.
I think that there's just it's less extensible to other platforms, like you mentioned, and it requires you to have the resources to continue to maintain it. And that's where today, we see that there's a lot of data that is siloed and a lot of tech debt and marketing. That's often kind of the effect that there were custom processes put in place in the past. There were solutions that were acquired that don't, integrate well with one another. And the challenge is that marketing is often kind of the lowest priority when it comes to getting internal developers or like IT resources to come solve those problems in a way that makes sense. And so, a lot of times it can make sense to have an outsourced function where you're bringing engineers in. We specialize in that type of service where we're bringing in not just an engineer, but also someone that understands like the marketing and business process and objectives. And what you're seeking to do there is to really simplify things and automate some of those problems that are day-to-day creating work, day-to-day execution, kind of manual process needs, or they're connecting systems that aren't talking to each other. So that's creating manual process to tie that data together. And I know that some of that is also facilitated just by connecting those data sources into a CDP to get everything in one place. I think that's kind of the challenge, is data architecture and data structure and bringing it together so that people aren't trying to manage all of that in a manual way.
Have you been burned by attribution? Are you tired of fighting with salespeople over target accounts and lead scores? We've all been there. And that's because traditional marketing analytics tools bolt onto your CRM and calculate attribution and engagement scores on the data as it is. And let's face it, most of the time, your CRM data is far from perfect. CaliberMind is unique because it pulls data from all your sources, not just your CRM, into a data platform. CaliberMind unifies your information, which means you can attribute dollars to website activity, standard Salesforce campaign activity, and more, without wasting time in spreadsheets. Ditch the spreadsheets and check out a new way to analyze revenue data with CaliberMind at calibermind.com. I am really hoping that we do see a trend that more CMOs and more marketing departments are thinking about bringing in a developer. We look at the tenure of executives, and CMOs are always at the bottom. They have the shortest tenures, and I've seen that a big part of that is the inability to prove ROI and the ability to tie activities to revenue and pipeline and speak the same language as the rest of the business. It's so critical to be able to do, but it's really hard to do. Like you mentioned, so many tools. I mean, I'm even thinking Google Analytics, LinkedIn, Facebook, like all of these advertising platforms aren't really built to speak the same language as our marketing automation platform or CRM. I think bringing in developers makes a lot of sense as long as you're not over customizing.
Yeah, as long as you're really trying to think about standardized data tables, creating those in a uniform way. I think what we have right now is there's a lot of like paid media, digital advertising platforms that are sitting out there and those marketers, in order to show that ROI, are having to undertake manual process to get information that isn't apples to apples out of one system and into another. And they're doing that. A lot of times there's not engineering or IT support that's doing that in a really standardized way. So I'm not advocating for developers to come in and build a lot of custom process. It's really to streamline and create some automations that are endpoints for that data so that other parts of the organization can have access to them. And so I see that as being the trend that we should all be striving to move towards, whether it's consolidating that data in a custom data warehouse and using engineering support to get there, or it's using engineering support to integrate those tools into a CDP, and of course using the out-of-the-box connections with the CDPs are able to provide to us today. But it's consolidating all of that information so that to tell that and to communicate ROI, we're not manually stitching together data on a routine basis.
Yeah, there was a study done by MIT Sloan that 50% of people's time is spent on mundane data tasks. That's way too high.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And
Yeah.
it makes you cringe when you see the need for it. And, often the easiest solution is to go knock it out. But, it needs to be something where we're really taking the time to document what's causing our teams to spend that time, so that we don't allow it to continue.
Yeah, and I if I could wave a magic wand and get a point across to CEOs, CMOs, and the rest of the C-suite, it's that we've seen, I've seen personally a lot of marketing senior leadership be let go, despite the entire organization reaching just really high growth rates, doubling, tripling every year. And from an outsider standpoint, I would say, whatever marketing is doing seems to be working. But because they didn't have the data infrastructure in place and because they couldn't tie what they were doing directly to revenue, they didn't have a leg to stand on when sales said, hey, we're having to do this all by ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the push right now for better attribution reporting and attribution philosophy that can be understood at the C-suite.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah, that's key.
We're bringing black box solutions, or we don't understand how things are calculated, and at that level, there needs to be clear understanding so that it can be communicated back. And that's tough right now because there's some great technology out there, but a lot of it revolves around, as you alluded to earlier, great data cleanliness in order to tie together all of those pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of philosophy that's baked into those tools, where you're choosing a path and building an attribution solution, kind of a custom attribution solution that allows you as the executive to fully understand and tell that story. Having your team do that is a huge undertaking.
Oh yeah, yeah. I that's why I'm such a fan of vendor solutions that use a CDP as a baseline and are transparent about their data models, because trust is everything. And just plugging in an attribution tool on top of your CRM or marketing automation platform assumes that data is in a good place. And that's too big of an assumption to make, because your executives know that your CRM data is a mess and they're not going to trust what's coming out of it. So it's so critical to involve your C-suite in the process, have an analyst who can speak a language that they can buy into, and to be able to actually show them what's going into the output. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's super. I would agree. I do think that there are some great technologies out there that integrate directly into the map, attribution solutions out there. I won't
But you
throw
have
names around just to throw them around, but
no, I agree, but you have to do the work to get the data in shape for them to be able to leverage it. If you're not going to do that work, you have to leverage a CDP and then layer it on top of that, I think.
And I agree with that 100%. And I also agree with the point that you made about having to get marketing leadership consented in and accepting, set the right expectations with them up front that this isn't going to be perfect. What we're going to do is we're going to learn we're going to get some attribution numbers out. We're going to realize that we've got some data cleanup to do. And it isn't going to be this 6-week implementation turnkey. We're going to have an attribution solution in place at the end of that. Mm-hmm. It's a process. It's usually, kind of a 3-month process is what we most typically see when we do implementations for attribution solutions. Mm-hmm. And that's to get the configuration to the point that it aligns with the business objectives. And from there, there's a lot of data cleanup. There's a lot of adjustments to the configuration. And then it's a constant process of, okay, now that we've got it in place, what do we disagree with? What's the model seem to be overstating or understating, in terms of what our understanding of the business is and how effective these channels and tactics actually are, so that can be tweaked. And it's a process.
Yeah, and I don't think enough emphasis can be put on the importance of having best practices in place, because if you're not using UTM parameters, If you don't have consistent campaign types, if you're not using naming conventions, if you don't have your programs in place, no matter what you use and how much that vendor can help you, you're in trouble.
It's just it is a fact that you have to put all of those pieces in place. It's part of marketing operations best practice. It's a big part of what, platform operations, as we call it, like the administration, governance, and architecture of these systems. It's what it's all about, so that you're operating from a good place, that as you bring in these new technologies to solve business problems and questions like attribution and revenue attribution and ROI, that you're able to do that much more quickly if you have a solid foundation.
Yeah, if you are just starting and you're at a startup and you're trying to figure out what direction to go in marketing operations, work with your peers, figure out best practices, and start putting them in place. You're going to be a hero, right? Because I've walked into too many organizations that don't understand UTM parameters, and they don't understand that it's case sensitive, and that they've just created 5 different ones because they aren't using them consistently. And that bifurcates or just segments your reporting in a way that you don't want it segmented.
Yeah, you have to go back to the basics. If you step into an organization where that's still not something that's in place, it's definitely priority.
100%. So for somebody who's just starting and they're thinking marketing operations might be a good fit, where would you recommend they start?
I would say find that identify that opportunity and jump right in. I think that's how most of us got into it. Today, it's a much better defined vocation. It's something that we've strived to kind of help with at Etumos, is to help define that vocation over the past few years. And I would call out MOPS Pros as a community that folks should absolutely join. But find those communities out there like MOPS Pros that help you self-educate. Join all the communities, try to find an entry role at a company that's really like passionate about giving you the opportunity to learn and grow. Try to get your hands on the tools. I think that the barrier, which is kind of frustrating to see as we want to get more and more people into marketing operations, is you just need exposure to these tools. And so in the absence of that, learning as much about like the business process that these tools are meant to facilitate, understanding that, reading the product docs, getting into the communities and seeing what's going on, that's the best place to start while you're trying to find that opportunity.
I would add that some of the platforms, the education's expensive, the certifications are expensive. I would say it's absolutely worth it, but if you can get into HubSpot and get a free account and start learning how automation flows and workflows are meant to work and how to set up campaigns, that does translate. So start somewhere. I would say that a lot of skill sets translate from one org to another. So if you're in an organization that is using HubSpot and they need somebody to come in and manage Eloqua, don't turn down the opportunity.
Oh, no, definitely not.
Yeah.
I think that, you touched on HubSpot. I would say Marketo has public product docs. They also have user groups, regional and national user groups. Right now, everything's virtual, so you can really jump into as many of those as you'd like. Pardot and Salesforce, they have trailheads, and those are free to jump into most of the trailheads.
And super solid. Like, I'm really impressed with Trailhead, I gotta say.
So there are communities out there, and there are free resources that aren't, they're a good first step for self-education. There's no good replacement for actual hands-on tool experience, which you got to find in that opportunity. But there's definitely more ways to get into it now than there were, I feel like, when I got started.
And what I've been impressed by running this podcast is how generous people are with their time and how excited they are to help people come into operations. So I think there are a lot of mentorship opportunities out there that people just need to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
We want as many people in ops as possible and to grow the position and really socialize what that should look like. Nate, thank you so much for joining us on the Revenue Marketing Report. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on MOPS Pros. I'm a member of the community there.
Wonderful.
And it's, as I said, I think some of the most sophisticated thought leaders in the space are there, and happy to connect with folks and talk about opportunities. So we've got a big team and lots of opportunities for mentorship.
Highly recommend. And I know you guys in the past have run the Seattle area Marketo group. Do you guys still do that?
Yeah, I'm the Seattle Marketo user group leader, so definitely a plug for those. And
highly recommend as well. I will plug for you.
Yeah, it's a great community. Good place for anybody, whether you're just getting started or you've been in the space for a long time, to share the challenges that you're facing or some of the wins you have. Sometimes that's one of the best things, is when you can really show off the good work that you're doing. It inspires everybody else to follow up.
For sure. Well, thank you for listening. And for those of you looking for great material like this, check out calibermind.com.